Number 2 says, know the difference between physical and chemical properties and changes. So let's start with just what's the difference between physical and chemical, whether it's a property or change. If we're talking about something physical, so what changes if it's physical? If it's still the same stuff, what did change? Yeah, we say it's appearance change. So physical is when the stuff or substance is the same, but the appearance changes. So a good example is shape. Anybody else think of other examples? The color. Did you say crumple? Cutting, thank you. I can hardly hear with these things on. Yeah, so the size would change when you cut it, or the shape might change when you cut it. Can it be what? Yeah, actually, melting point, boiling point. When you melt ice, it's still water, and when you freeze water, it's still water. I mean, ice and water are still the same substance. So melting point, freezing point, boiling point, density is if something evaporates, it's just become a gas, but it's still the same stuff. Dissolving is also just physical. What's it? Baking would be chemical. Yeah, baking's chemical because you can't undo it. That's why, cake batter and the actual cake baked, they're way different. You can't undo baking a cake. Whereas if you evaporate something, you can get it to recondense. Water that evaporates eventually rains back down on us. Yeah, say it again. Well, if you mix liquids together, they might chemically react, but you also can mix liquids together where they just dissolve into one another. You can separate those again. What you do is you boil them, and one of them will boil off first, and then the other one. Not if they chemically react. So yeah, when you mix two liquids together, you have to know what the liquids are to know whether or not a chemical change is going on or if they're just physically mixing. Like when you put salt in water, they just physically mix because if you boil the water off, the salt is still there. But if you mix salt with some other things, it might chemically react and actually change into something else. What's that? If it changes into something else, then no, it's not still salt. That's a chemical change. If it recombines. Yeah. Yeah, physically, I always think about can you undo it? Like if you cut something, technically you can't undo it, but you could put it back together. You could tape it together to make it look whole. If you break a glass, you could glue the pieces together. So yeah, if you think about being able to undo it, that generally is a physical. So then chemical is when the stuff actually changes. It changes into new substances, and the reason why is because the atoms get rearranged and recombined. Does that make stuff? So when the stuff or substance changes into a new substance, that's a chemical change. And the reason we call it a new substance is because the atoms are actually rearranged and combined into new things. Now, unfortunately, color can also be a chemical change. So a lot of times you have to know more than just color to decide if it's physical or chemical. You know any other chemical ones offhand? Yeah. burning is one. Like when your batteries get all white and nasty, start growing that foam on them, that's called corrosion. Molding would be one, yes, when food's rotting. Decomposition, so like roadkill, some chemical change going on there. Your body has all kinds of chemical changes going on, digestion and all that stuff. But those are some of the big ones. Rusting's another big one. Metals that get that orange look instead of the white look, we usually call that rusting. Whereas if it's kind of a whitish look, we call it corrosion. Okay, so those are chemical changes. The other thing I want to mention is the difference between a property versus a change. A property is like it could happen, but a change is it is happening. That's kind of the difference is properties could happen, but changes are happening. So my example would be paper is flammable. Do you guys know what the word flammable means? It means it can burn, right? So that's a property. But if you say my paper is on fire, that's a change going on. It's referring to the same thing, paper burning. But when I say paper's flammable, it could burn if somebody puts a match to it. But when it's actually burning, that's the change. As far as like physical, an example of physical would be is if I say that glass is fragile. Fragile just means it could break, right? Not if, is. That's the property. But if somebody drops your glass and breaks it, that's the change. So it's kind of a subtle difference. Not really one. I'm far more concerned you know the difference between physical and chemical. So when we're doing labs, you can decide if it was just a physical change or occurred or if something chemical took place.